Tonight, we'll head to New Jersey, where lawmakers and leaders here in the Garden State have wrapped up their trek to D.C. Governor Christie delivering the keynote address following the walk to Washington, why he says state taxes are still too high and Democrats are to blame for it. We'll also be talking transportation with the Train Trust Fund here, President Michael Allen. And we're remembering a piece of local history. An author speaks out to RFL about the Algonquin Roundtable, why he says we should never forget this celebrated group and piece of history. Plus, it's trivia night, and we are taking your calls to see how well you've been paying attention to the week's current events. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. Tonight, we will begin in New Jersey, where state leaders have wrapped up the annual 78th annual walk to Washington. Now, I attended the event from Newark to the nation's capital, and I spoke with several leaders about the state of New Jersey's economy and transportation infrastructure, as well as the trust fund. Now, we're going to get into all that in a minute, but first, we heard from the governor, Governor Chris Christie, who laid out where he said issues are right now in New Jersey at the annual event.
The fact is that we have to grow this economy, not the government. We need to grow the economy. And the way to grow this economy in this state is to make it profitable for business to grow the economy. We need to make sure to lift our middle class in our state by making these better paying jobs available to them by growing our economy. The anemic growth we have nationwide, 2% or so, is not nearly enough to grow our country's economy and, as a result, the economies of our individual states. And when we put an additional headwind in our face of higher expense through the things that government controls in taxation, we make matters even worse for those families. Because ultimately, it is those families that pay that expense. We have helped the families in this state. We do have 153,000 more jobs than we had when we walked in here. We do no longer have the type of budgetary overspending on the discretionary items that we had when I arrived here. And I think that even though they may try and try again, certain members of the legislature understand that as long as I'm here, we're not going to make the state less affordable. We're going to make sure that things get done in a way that represent fairness to the people who pay the bills. We can do that. And I'll continue to reach out and try to compromise with my friends who run the state legislature. Of course, the one difficulty is I'm starting to get the idea that I'm going to sign an executive order to remove all the mirrors from the State House. You might wonder, why would a second-term governor want to remove all the mirrors from the State House? It's because every time a member of the legislature walks by a mirror and looks into it, they see a governor. Every time. And that tends to change their perspective on things a little bit. And sometimes the spirit of compromise that once filled the hallways tends to get a little bit less. It's my job to make sure that we force that compromise. And I have the freedom to be able to do that and will.
Okay, so an interesting take from the governor there in terms of whose attentions are diverted in Trenton in terms of keeping their eye on the ball. Well, there were a lot of issues, certainly, that are facing New Jersey, Transportation Trust Fund, but also the governor's political futures. And some would argue the poll numbers are saying New Jerseyans aren't satisfied that his attention is being diverted. You have a huge gaping budget hole. I mentioned infrastructure, Bridgegate, all that. Well, I spoke to Michael Ahrens, who is in many ways considered the dean of New Jersey political coverage here. He's with the New Jersey Network. And this is part of our conversation yesterday as we traveled the train from Newark all the way down to D.C. Michael, thank you very much. Of course, I'm here with the Dean of New Jersey Politics. A little math. Explain to me where they're going to find the money. Let's start with the Transportation Trust Fund. Everybody seems to agree they need it. Everybody seems to agree that Washington's not going to give them everything that they need. but that's where the agreement ends. How do they solve this impasse?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I don't have the answer. I read this morning that there will be no announcement on the Transportation Trust Fund anytime soon, not in conjunction with the governor's budget address Tuesday. Everybody knows that the simplest and most direct way to resolve it is to hike the gasoline tax, but those involved seem to want to combine it with a tax cut in another area. Republicans,
Inheritance tax.
That's one option that Republicans favor. An option that Democrats, led by Senate President Sweeney, favor is to lower the tax on retirement incomes in the state, so that right now you have to pay income tax on your pension if you're a pensioner. After the first, I think it's $30,000, and they want to raise that to $50,000 before you have to pay income tax. Everybody wants to make the pain of a gas tax hike a little sweeter with some corresponding cut.
Yep.
But we're a long way from a resolution that all can agree on.
Pension reform. Now, this obviously is not a unique problem in New Jersey, but it does seem that there's a legitimate argument on the labor side to say, we made concessions a couple of years ago. We thought we had a deal. Where's the funding here to keep the pot right? How does this play out?
That's another tough one. You're hitting the two top issues in Trenton right now. That one seems to be even at more of an impasse than the Transportation Trust Fund. We all expect there will be some resolution on the trust fund by June 30th. This pension thing seems to have divided the two parties, maybe irreconcilably. Again, it's Sweeney leading the Democrats, not wanting to further alienate the public employee unions, who were already alienated by his agreement with Christie on the first round of pension reform. He's saying, we can't trust you, Governor, to do anything because you didn't put in the full state amount you promised. The governor is, I'm not sure what his position is right now. He's been kind of silent. He appointed a task force to help him out of this mess in August, gave them 30 days to make some initial statements, gave them 60 days for a full report, and that was about 180 days ago. And I'm told that they might do something in this coming week, announce some sort of set of recommendations. But this one seems to be really bollock stuff.
Speaking of the governor, historically, folks in his administration always love to tout the poll numbers. Recent poll numbers, not so much. To that end, there seems to be a growing sense, at least among New Jerseyans, that stop traveling around the country or even globally here. We got enough challenges back home. 2016, that's a ways down the line. Let's first tend to matters at home. How does Christie navigate being a presidential hopeful, and if you believe the polls, with diminishing likelihood, and at the same time be a governor? I know he's got a recent election behind him, but still, it seems to be a tough match to prove you can walk and chew gum at the same time.
He's been in free fall for the last 6 weeks, but I don't think he's dead yet. As far as the home folks in New Jersey, I think he's leaving them behind for the time being. I think his priority is the White House, and you can't, he says I have more than one club in the bag, meaning I can walk and chew gum at the same time, but he has been absent 24 out of 48 days so far this year, and New Jerseyans do seem to be resenting it. The latest Eagleton poll numbers out yesterday were abysmal for Christie. 59% do not think he'd be a good president, 35% do. That's not good in your home state. But I also heard on the train today someone saying he's where he wants to be in at the moment. You don't want to be the front runner a year and 10 months before the election. You want to be in the middle of the pack so that everybody's taking aim at somebody else who is the front runner. Right now, that's obviously Jeb Bush. And that rings true to me that where he's positioned is not terrible, even though the poll numbers in his home state are terrible.
You know, I think people at their own peril discount the Port Authority story, because if I've seen a story recently, I don't know about you, Michael, that has resonated with people at home. Nobody likes waiting online, have to keep pushed around by the Port Authority costume trying to pick up your husband, wife, daughter, son, whatever the case may be. And nobody likes the idea that somebody else gets to have a flight that they don't, let alone folks that represent the Port Authority. It's been a mess for a long time, but have we reached a tipping point where finally we get a little more transparency here?
Well, I think we will get a little more transparency at the Port Authority. I read this morning that they're looking for a new CEO, and they're doing it the way that a corporation would do it. They're conducting a nationwide search rather than the recent tradition of the two governors selecting an executive director and a deputy executive director. But getting to how this plays for Christie, I think it parallels what we were just talking about. I think it plays much worse for him here close to home than it does nationally. I heard two reporters on a panel last night at Montclair State University who cover Christie closely say that when they were in Iowa with him for 2 days, nobody asked about Bridgegate. Yeah, people are upset about the chairman's flight. David Sampson apparently getting a special flight arranged for him by United Airlines that went from Newark to his vacation home in South Carolina. But again, these things seem to cut closer to home than out in the heartland.
Well, then finally, on the subject of Bridgegate, are you hearing anything, whether it be on either of the parallel investigations? Should Christie feel the worst is behind him, or could there be more?
What I'm hearing is that the U.S. Attorney is being very thorough and very aggressive, but it's a very tight-lipped operation. I haven't heard any leaks. Well, actually, there was a report in Esquire.com this week suggesting that maybe Fishman was going to announce some indictments in March, the U.S. Attorney. But the last time Esquire reported what was going on in the investigation, Fishman actually made a statement saying, "Don't believe what you've been reading lately in the press." He hasn't done that this time, but I think it's anybody's guess when that investigation wraps up and whether it touches anybody that we don't expect it to touch.
Never dull in New Jersey, is it?
No, it never is, Richard.
Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you.
When we come back on the other side of the break, our panel joins us to discuss the state of New Jersey's struggling economy and a host of other issues impacting the guy on your screen's presidential hopes. Also coming up, open up the phone lines. We will for tonight's trivia. We will test you on this week's current events. Just call the number on your screen, 888-766-2428. And hey, get the question right, you get this wonderful RFL coffee mug. That's right. The miracles never cease. We'll be right back.